It started on a cold evening when the city outside felt distant, almost like it belonged to someone else. Inside his small apartment, the quiet was so deep that it almost pressed against his ears. For most people, silence was peaceful. For him, it had turned into a heavy presence that followed him everywhere. He would come home from work, drop his keys on the table, and look around as if expecting something to change, but nothing ever did. The same empty walls, the same neatly arranged furniture, the same stillness that reminded him how alone he really was. He had moved to this city hoping for a fresh start. In the beginning, everything felt exciting. The tall buildings, the crowds, the idea that he could build a new life from scratch. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the excitement faded. His job demanded long hours, and whenever he tried to make plans with someone, schedules never matched. Slowly, without noticing, he slipped into a routine where the only voice he heard after work was his own breathing. Most nights, he tried to distract himself. He would watch videos, scroll endlessly on his phone, or clean the apartment even when nothing needed cleaning. But the distraction never lasted long. Eventually, the silence returned, stronger than before. The clock on the wall would tick softly, and that tiny sound became the loudest thing in the room. Sometimes he found himself staring at the ceiling, wondering how life had become so small. He wasn't unhappy because of one big event. It wasn't heartbreak, loss, or some dramatic turning point. It was something slower, more hidden-like, a shadow growing quietly behind him. One day he realized he had stopped talking to his old friends as often. Another day he noticed he no longer made plans for weekends. And then one night, he understood that he couldn't even remember the last time he felt excited about anything. That realization hit harder than anything else. The apartment itself was simple. A soft gray rug, a couch he bought secondhand, a small table with a lamp that gave off warm yellow light. He had chosen the place because it felt calm, but now that calmness seemed to swallow him whole. The kitchen was barely used except for simple meals. The bedroom, neat and quiet, felt more like a place he went to hide from the world. Sometimes he left the window slightly open just so he could hear cars passing by. A reminder that life continued outside even if nothing moved inside. His evenings became predictable. He would sit on the couch, open his laptop, and try to find something to watch. But even the shows he used to love didn't feel the same anymore. He would click through different videos, halfway through one before switching to another. Nothing held his attention. The silence behind him felt like it was waiting for him to stop, waiting to pull him back into that emptiness he tried so hard to ignore. That night, the sky outside was a deep, heavy gray. The kind of sky that made the whole city feel tired. He sat on the couch again, the soft glow of the lamp lighting half the room. His laptop rested on his knees and he scrolled through videos with no real intention. He wasn't looking for entertainment, he was looking for something to fill the silence, even for a moment. As he scrolled, he came across a thumbnail with a simple title, Isolation and Death Piano Music. The title made him pause. It wasn't something he would normally click. It sounded strange, maybe even dramatic, but something about it drew him in. Maybe it was the word isolation, which felt painfully familiar. Maybe it was the curiosity of why someone would choose such a title. Or maybe he just wanted to hear something that matched the heavy feeling sitting in his chest. He clicked on it finally, telling himself he would just listen for a moment. The screen turned dark, and then the soft sound of piano began to play. The first notes were slow and gentle, almost like footsteps in an empty hallway. The melody wasn't loud or complicated. It was simple, almost fragile, like it could break at any second. But then it grew, filling the room with a kind of sadness that didn't hurt, it soothed. He leaned back against the couch, letting the music wash over him. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't trying to run away from his feelings. He just let them exist. The piano sounded like someone speaking without words, like someone saying they understood what loneliness felt like. The music didn't judge him, didn't rush him, didn't tell him to get over it. It simply existed with him, sharing the same quiet space. As the melody moved gently through the room, he felt something shift inside. He didn't suddenly feel happy or energized. It wasn't dramatic like in movies, but but it was something small and real. The weight on his chest felt a little lighter. The tightness in his mind loosened. He didn't know if it was the music or just the fact that he finally allowed himself to feel something. But whatever it was, it made the silence in the room softer, less threatening. He closed his eyes for a moment. Memories drifted into his thoughts, not sharp, painful ones, but soft ones he hadn't thought about in years. His childhood home. The sound of distant traffic outside his window. The way evenings used to feel warm and familiar when he lived with family. He hadn't realized how much he missed simple things like voices in the background or the clatter of dishes or someone asking how his day was. He hadn't realized how much he missed being seen. When he opened his eyes again, the room felt different. Not brighter or warmer, but less harsh. The piano continued, weaving a slow, emotional path through the air. It didn't matter if the title sounded dramatic. The music itself wasn't about death or fear. It was about the kind of loneliness people don't talk about, the kind that sits quietly in your chest until the right sound. The right moment brings it to the surface. He wasn't sure how long he sat there listening. Maybe minutes, maybe an hour. Time felt strange when the music played. Eventually, he realized he hadn't checked his phone, hadn't scrolled, hadn't tried to distract himself. He had simply sat and listened. It had been a long time since he allowed his mind to be still. When the last note finally faded, the silence returned. But this silence was different. It wasn't heavy or suffocating. It was gentle, like a soft breath after tears. He took a deep inhale and let it out slowly. For the first time in months, he didn't feel completely alone. The music had reminded him of something he had forgotten, that even in quiet, even in isolation, he was still human, still capable of feeling, still connected to something bigger than the four walls around him. He didn't know it yet. But this quiet moment, just him and a simple piano. Melody would become the beginning of a small but important change in his life. A change he didn't plan, didn't search for, and didn't expect. All he wanted was to escape the silence for a little while. Instead, he found something that touched the part of him he'd been ignoring for far too long. And though he didn't realize it at that moment, this was only the first step of a journey that would lead him toward understanding himself, reconnecting with the world, and discovering that even the darkest nights can begin to shift with the softest, simplest sound. The next morning came slowly, almost unwillingly. Pale light pushed through the thin curtains of the apartment, casting quiet shadows on the floor. He woke up feeling different, though he could not clearly explain how. Nothing dramatic had changed. The room still looked the same. The day ahead still felt long, and the silence hadn't vanished. But inside him, something had shifted enough for him to notice. He got out of bed and stood for a moment, listening to the faint sounds from outside: birds, a passing motorcycle, distant voices. It felt unusual to pay attention to these things, but he found himself doing it anyway. Maybe it was because of the piano music from the night before. Somehow, those soft notes still lingered in his mind, as if they were quietly breathing beneath his thoughts. He went through his morning routine like always. Washed his face, boiled water for tea, sat at the small kitchen table. But even his tea tasted slightly different today, not because the flavor had changed, because he was actually present in the moment instead of rushing through it. He watched the steam rise, curling in soft shapes before disappearing. For a few minutes, he thought about the video he had listened to. The title still felt strange, dramatic, maybe even uncomfortable, but the music itself had been gentle, almost tender in a way he hadn't expected. He wondered why something so simple had affected him so deeply. Maybe because he had been avoiding his feelings for so long that the smallest push finally broke through the wall he had built. When he left for work, he stepped outside with a quiet sense of awareness. The air felt cooler than usual. People walked past him, some talking, some rushing, some moving slowly, as if they had all the time in the world. He never paid much attention to strangers, but today he noticed small things. A kid holding his parent's hand, a shopkeeper sweeping the front of a store, a woman humming quietly to herself. None of it mattered directly to him, yet he felt connected to it in a strange way. Work was the same as always, tasks piling up, emails waiting, the steady hum of computers, the sound of people typing around him. But he wasn't as weighed down today. His mind felt slightly clearer. He still had moments where the familiar heaviness tried to return, but now it was softer, less sharp. During his lunch break, instead of staring at his phone like he usually did, he found himself looking out the window. He watched cars pass by, watched people cross the street, watched a stray dog trot along the sidewalk with its tail wagging. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't empty either. In the late afternoon, when work finally ended, he walked home at a slow pace. The city lights were beginning to turn on, glowing softly as the sky shifted into early evening. The streets carried a mix of energy and exhaustion, the typical rhythm of city life. He blended into the crowd, but he felt more aware of everything around him. When he reached his apartment, he unlocked the door and stepped inside. The quiet greeted him just as it always did. But today, instead of avoiding it, he paused and let the silence settle around him. It didn't feel like a heavy presence anymore. It felt more like something waiting. Without thinking too much, he sat down on the couch and opened his laptop. The screen glowed softly in the dim room. He hesitated for a moment, unsure why he was doing it, then searched for the same piano video again. The thumbnail was still the same, dark, simple, a title that felt heavier than the music itself. He clicked on it, the room filled with the same soft melody from the night before. The gentle notes flowed slowly, like someone speaking calmly in a quiet room. This time, the music didn't surprise him. Instead, it settled into the space like an old friend returning. He leaned back and let his body relax into the couch. As he listened, he realized something important. The music didn't make him sad. It made him honest. It allowed him to sit with feelings he usually pushed away. The loneliness, the tiredness, the quiet longing for connection, they all rose to the surface. But in a way that didn't frighten him, he closed his eyes again. Memories drifted through his mind, gentle and steady. He thought about the life he once imagined for himself. He thought about the people he cared for but slowly drifted away from. He thought about how he had convinced himself that keeping busy would solve everything. But busy didn't fix loneliness. It only covered it like a thin blanket that couldn't keep out the cold. The music continued. He found himself breathing deeper. He didn't realize how shallow his breaths had been until now. Each inhale felt like it brought warmth into his chest, and each exhale carried away a bit of the heaviness. A small part of him wondered why this simple video had affected him more than anything else he tried. He had watched motivational speeches, listened to upbeat playlists, even tried meditation apps. None of them touched him the way these quiet piano notes did. Maybe because the music didn't try to cheer him up or push him forward. It just stayed with him, patient and calm. His phone buzzed on the table. Normally, he would have picked it up instantly. But tonight, he let it buzz without moving. For once, he didn't feel the need to distract himself. The piano was enough. After a while, he opened his eyes and looked around the room. Something felt different in the air. It wasn't that anything had changed physically, but the atmosphere felt softer, warmer. He realized that maybe the change wasn't in the room, it was in him. He got up slowly and walked to the window. The sky had darkened, and the city outside glowed with streetlights and headlights. People walked along the sidewalks, talking or laughing or hurrying home. He watched them for a moment, not with envy, but with curiosity. It had been a long time since he felt interested in the world. Beyond his walls, he stayed by the window until the music reached its halfway point. The notes grew slightly richer, carrying a deeper emotion. He felt something stir inside him. Not sadness exactly, but recognition. A feeling that he wasn't alone in experiencing loneliness. Somewhere out there, other people felt it too. The music sounded like proof. He returned to the couch and sat down again. He didn't want to break the moment. The room felt calm, and he wanted to stay in that calm for as long as possible. He listened until the last note faded quietly at the end of the track. For a few seconds, the silence returned. But this silence felt like a clean slate, not an empty space. It felt peaceful, almost intentional. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He didn't realize how much tension he had been carrying in his body until he felt it. Release. He didn't know exactly what the music meant to him yet. He didn't know why he was drawn back to it or what it was trying to tell him. But he knew one thing. Clearly, he wasn't afraid of his feelings anymore. He wasn't running from the silence. He wasn't trying to fill every moment with noise. Instead, he felt like he was finally listening to himself. He closed the laptop gently and sat there in the soft glow of the lamp. The night felt different from the one before. He felt more aware, more present, more human. Maybe the change wouldn't be fast. Maybe his life wouldn't suddenly become full of people and excitement. But for the first time in a long while, he sensed a small light within him. Something warm and steady. He didn't know what tomorrow would look like. He didn't know if the heaviness would return. But he did know he had found something meaningful. Something simple, yet powerful enough to reach the quiet corners of his heart. And deep down, he understood that this was only the beginning of a quiet, slow transformation that he hadn't expected, but somehow needed more than anything. Throughout the following week, he found himself thinking about the soft piano music more often than he expected. It wasn't an obsession, and it wasn't something he talked about with anyone. It was simply a quiet presence that lingered in the back of his mind. Even during work, when he was typing emails or organizing files, small moments reminded him of the calm he felt that night. It was strange, almost comforting. How a simple melody had settled inside him like a gentle echo he could return to whenever he needed. Every evening after work, he walked home the same way, passing the same shops and hearing the same sounds of the city. But now, instead of rushing, he walked at a slower pace. He noticed the way the light from street lamps fell across the pavement. He noticed how the cold breeze felt against his skin. He even noticed how the sound of traffic created a kind of rhythm in the background. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't living on autopilot. One evening, the sky was tinted with soft shades of pink and orange as the sun set. He paused for a moment at the edge of the sidewalk to admire it. He couldn't remember the last time he had looked up at the sky long enough to appreciate its colors. He wondered when he had stopped paying attention to small things like this, things that used to bring him a sense of calm when he was younger. When he reached his apartment, he placed his bag on the chair and looked around the familiar room. The silence was still there, but it didn't feel as heavy tonight. It felt more like a blank space waiting to be filled. Without hesitation, he turned on the lamp, opened his laptop, and played the same piano track again. The first notes drifted through the room, soft and slow, carrying the same gentle sadness he had grown strangely fond of. The music felt like a warm hand resting on a tired heart. He sat on the couch and leaned back, letting his body relax as the melody spread through the room. This time, as he listened, memories bubbled to the surface, not sudden or overwhelming, but soft and steady. He remembered the small town where he grew up, with its quiet streets and the old house where he spent his childhood. He remembered afternoons spent sitting near the window while his mother played the piano, filling the house with gentle tunes. He had forgotten how safe those moments felt. He remembered the sound of tea boiling on the stove, the soft hum of conversations in the background, and the way the evenings always carried a warm, familiar glow. He hadn't realized how much he missed those simple, everyday experiences, how much he missed feeling grounded in a place that felt like home. As the music continued, a deep sigh escaped his chest, one he didn't realize he was holding. It felt like releasing a weight he'd been carrying for too long. He wasn't crying, but his chest ached with a kind of honesty he rarely allowed himself to feel. He closed his eyes and allowed the music to guide his thoughts. He wasn't thinking about work or responsibilities, or the long to-do lists he usually worried about. Instead, he found himself thinking about connection, about how much he missed being surrounded by people who understood him, about how much he longed for moments of warmth and closeness. He realized he had spent so much time trying to be strong, trying to manage everything on his own, that he forgot how much humans need comfort. He forgot that it was okay to feel lost sometimes. It was okay to need company. It was okay to want someone to sit with you in silence. The piano's melody shifted slightly, becoming deeper, almost fuller. It felt like the music was gently telling him that these thoughts were valid, that loneliness didn't mean weakness. It only meant he was human. After a while, he got up and walked to the kitchen. He made himself a cup of warm tea and carried it back to the couch. The warmth of the cup in his hands felt grounding. The steam brushed against his face as he lifted it, and it reminded him of evenings long ago when his family gathered together without needing a reason. He sipped slowly, letting the taste settle on his tongue. It was a small comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. The piano music blended with the quiet sound of his breathing, creating a soft atmosphere that felt peaceful and real as he sat there. A sudden thought came to him. When was the last time he truly talked to someone, not about work or plans or small talk, but really talked? The kind of conversation where you share your thoughts without fear. The kind where someone listens, not because they have to, but because they want to. He couldn't remember. That realization didn't make him sad. It simply made him aware of how disconnected he had become without noticing. Maybe that was why the piano music affected him so much. It reminded him of connection, of emotion, of things he had pushed away. He set the teacup down on the table and sat quietly, allowing himself to reflect. He had never been someone who opened up easily. He had always believed that dealing with things alone was the safest way, but that wasn't working anymore. The silence had grown too big, too empty. Perhaps it was time to change that. The thought was gentle, almost shy, but it stayed with him. It wasn't a decision or a plan. It was simply a feeling that maybe he didn't have to stay isolated forever. When the music reached a particularly soft section, he felt something warm spread through him. It wasn't hope exactly, but something close. A small light in a dark room. He took out his phone and looked at the list of contacts. Names he hadn't reached out to in months or even years stared back at him. He hovered his finger over a few of them, unsure of what to say or how to start. He wasn't ready yet, and that was okay. The important part was that he was thinking about it. He put the phone aside and focused again on the music. The piano notes felt like a conversation, one that didn't require words. It was enough for him to sit with his feelings, to acknowledge them without trying to hide. Time passed gently. The music flowed. The room dimmed as the night grew deeper, and he felt a quiet sense of peace settle inside him. He wasn't healed. He wasn't suddenly full of energy or joy, but he was present. He was listening. He was alive in a way he hadn't been for a long time. And then something unexpected happened. As the music played, he felt a memory emerge, one he hadn't thought of in years. It was a memory of himself sitting near a window on a rainy afternoon, listening to the sound of the piano while drawing in a notebook. He remembered how safe that moment felt. How free, how warm. He realized he missed being that version of himself, the one who found comfort in small things, the one who felt connected to the world even when he was alone. The music ended softly, fading into silence. He sat there, breathing slowly, feeling the quiet settle around him once more. But now the silence felt gentle, almost like a companion instead of an enemy. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew he was ready to face it differently. He didn't want to hide from life anymore. He didn't want to go through days without feeling anything. Music had awakened something in him, a small but powerful reminder that emotions were not something to fear. He closed his laptop, finished the last sip of his tea, and leaned back on the couch. The room was still, but his heart wasn't. It was moving, slowly and softly, toward something he couldn't name yet, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The night grew heavier as the last bit of daylight faded from the sky, and the air around the house seemed to thicken with a strange weight. The old piano in the corner remained silent, yet its presence felt louder than any sound in the room. It was as if the instrument carried a memory, something trapped within it, waiting for the right moment to rise again. The person standing before, it could feel that pull, the subtle invitation mixed with a warning, like a whisper that wasn't spoken with words. The room itself looked almost normal at first glance, but the longer one stayed inside, the more the stillness seemed out of place. There were no sounds from outside, not the wind, not distant cars, not even the usual night insects. But it felt like the entire world had paused, leaving only this room, this piano, and the person who now stood frozen in the middle of it. A soft breath was taken, steadying the mind. The air smelled slightly dusty, like forgotten pages of an old book. As the person stepped closer to the piano, the wooden floor creaked underfoot, a small sound that somehow echoed louder than expected. Maybe it was because everything else was so quiet. Maybe it was because the house held its breath too. The piano keys were visible in the dim light. Some slightly yellowed with age. Faint reflection rested on them, almost like a thin mist. The person reached out slowly, hesitant but curious, fingertips stopping just before touching the keys. There was a strange warmth in the air around the piano, not from the room itself, but from the instrument, as if it was alive in some quiet, hidden way. Memories of the last 2 days flickered in the mind, the first strange sound that came from the piano, the eerie melody that seemed to play even when no one sat at it. The light that had flickered out the moment that sound filled the room. None of it felt random. Everything felt connected, woven together by something unseen. The person knew that walking away was an option. Leaving the house, stepping out into the cold air outside, and pretending none of this had ever happened. But something deep inside insisted otherwise. Sometimes the truth pulls a person forward, even when fear tries to push them back. With a gentle exhale, the fingers finally touched the first key. Nothing happened. No sudden sound, no cold rush, no spark of movement. The key felt smooth and slightly cool. The person pressed it down, expecting a soft note to fill the silence, but the key made no sound at all. The piano stayed silent, refusing to play. Another key was pressed, then another. Still no sound, not even the faintest vibration. It was as if the piano had lost its voice entirely. Confusion settled in for a moment. Instrument had played on its own before, clearly, loudly, and with purpose. But now that someone tried to play it, it stayed quiet. Silence felt intentional. The person sat on the piano bench, hands resting gently on the keys, feeling the stillness. The bench creaked softly, and that small noise made the room feel even more tense. Somewhere in the house, something shifted, a soft tap, or maybe just the settling of old wood. But it was enough to stir a chill down the spine. The person lifted their hands again and placed them on the middle keys. This time, instead of pressing, they rested lightly, waiting. The air felt heavier now, thick enough that each breath came slower then, softly. One of the low keys pressed down on its own. The sound that came out was faint, almost distant, but it was real. A deep tone vibrated through the room like a heartbeat in slow motion. Now the person jerked slightly but kept their place, watching the key rise back to its original position. Another key sank on its own, this time a higher one. The note was clearer, sharper, echoing gently through the space. Then another. Before long, several keys began to move, slowly at first, then forming a soft pattern. Not quite a melody yet, but scattered notes that felt like someone trying to speak in fragments. The sound wasn't threatening. It wasn't loud. It was more like someone trying to reach out, someone who didn't have the strength to form full words. The person stayed completely still, heart pounding but mind focused. The notes were spaced apart, each one carrying a weight that felt almost emotional, almost like sorrow woven into sound. A quiet thought crossed the mind. Maybe this was not about fear at all. Maybe the piano wasn't trying to harm anyone. Maybe it was trying to share something, reveal something, or ask for something. The notes continued, forming a pattern that began to resemble a slow tune. It rose and fell gently, almost like a lullaby, except there was a heaviness behind it, as if the melody carried a story that had never been told. The person listened carefully, leaning slightly forward. With every note, the room seemed to warm a little, like the tension was slowly melting away. The fear eased, replaced with a sense of calm curiosity. The piano wasn't just playing. It was guiding, quietly, without planning to. The person lifted their own hands and pressed a single key in response. For a moment, the house froze again. The air grew still, but then the piano answered with another note, soft and gentle. Another key was pressed by the person, and within seconds a match responded from the piano. As if encouraging them, the two continued back and forth, a slow exchange of simple notes. Almost like a conversation spoken in music, no words were needed. The sound held its own meaning. The atmosphere shifted again, becoming almost peaceful. The person felt the fear drain out, replaced by something warmer, something empathetic. It felt like someone on the other side of the music was relieved, finally heard, finally understood. A thought formed quietly. Maybe the piano wasn't haunted in the way stories often say. Maybe there was no anger or danger behind the sound. Maybe it was a lingering presence, a memory waiting for someone to listen, something unfinished, something that needed closure. The melody slowly grew clearer, more complete. It wasn't complex, but it carried depth, like it had been held inside the piano for a long time. The person followed along gently, matching the soft rise and fall, as the tune reached its calm peak. A faint glow seemed to shimmer around the piano, very subtle, like moonlight catching on dust. It wasn't frightening. It was gentle, like the last flicker of a candle before settling. The final note played, long and slow, held by the piano itself. The person stayed still, listening as the sound faded into silence. Then everything became absolutely quiet. A soft warmth lingered in the room, like a sense of peace finally settling. The piano remained still now, no keys moving, no sound rising. The atmosphere felt lighter, calmer, as if something had finally eased inside the house. The person stood slowly, taking a deep breath. Something felt different. The fear that had once held them back had vanished, replaced by a strange comfort. Whatever had been trapped in the piano felt released, not in a dramatic or frightening way, but gently and quietly. The room looked the same, yet it felt entirely different. The story wasn't finished yet, but a new understanding had begun to take shape, and deep down, the person knew they were no longer alone in this journey, but they were no longer afraid of what came next. The night passed slowly, almost too quietly, as if the house was resting after everything that had happened. When the morning light finally pushed through the curtains, it didn't feel harsh or cold. It was soft, warm, and gentle, like the sun knew the house had carried along. Heavy silence for too many years, and was now trying to comfort it. The person woke early, long before the usual time, feeling a strange mix of calm and unfinished thought in their chest. The memory of the piano playing its soft, emotional melody still lingered vividly. It wasn't something that could be forgotten easily. It wasn't a dream or a trick of the mind. It had felt real, too real. As they sat up, they noticed how different the room felt. The air was lighter, easier to breathe. It was almost like something invisible had lifted during the night. A strange peace filled the space. It's a kind that only comes after something long hidden finally finds a voice. But even with this peace, there was also a quiet question that kept tugging at the mind. Why was the melody played? What did it mean? And why did the presence within the piano reach out in the first place? Those thoughts stayed close as the person got ready for the day, moving slowly, thoughtfully, almost as if their body didn't quite want to step away from the mystery that waited downstairs. And soon enough, feet carried them quietly toward the piano room. The hallway felt different now. Not as cold, not as shadowed by something unseen. The air no longer held that thick stillness from before. Instead, the house felt like it had taken a deep breath after being quiet for too long. When the person reached the piano room, they paused at the doorway. The instrument stood exactly where it always had, but somehow it felt changed. Not physically, but in presence. As if it had finally shared something long buried and was now settling back into a calm state. Still, the person stepped closer, drawn without hesitation this time. The fear that once filled the room had dissolved completely. What remained was curiosity mixed with a gentle sense of connection, like an invisible thread pulling them closer. The piano keys were still, untouched since the final note the night before. The bench waited, quietly inviting but not forcing. The person ran a hand along the wood, feeling the smooth surface beneath their fingers. It was strange how an old piece of furniture could feel so alive. They sat on the bench again, this time without fear. Their hands hovered over the keys for a moment, feeling the air around them, a soft, warm air that almost seemed to move gently, like a breath, before pressing anything. The person whispered softly, almost without meaning to, "What do you want to show me?" No answer came in words. But after a few seconds, the air shifted slightly. Not cold, not heavy, just shifted. As if someone invisible had stepped closer to listen, the person pressed a single key, soft note that floated gently through the room. They waited. And then, after a brief pause, the piano responded again, on its own. This time the note was clearer and more confident than before. Not heavy, like the first time it played alone. Not broken. It felt more like a greeting. The person pressed another key. And again, the piano replied. Slowly, a pattern formed between them. But it wasn't like the night before. This wasn't an emotional call for help or the expression of something trapped. This melody felt like communication is slow. Careful attempt to guide the person somewhere, the piano's notes shifted to a warm but simple tune, repeating the same few tones as if trying to draw the mind towards something familiar. The person listened closely with their eyes closed, and as the melody repeated, something stirred inside them, a memory. It wasn't a sharp memory, not something from childhood or a major moment in life. It was faint, unfamiliar, almost like a memory that didn't belong to them. The person opened their eyes, confused. The piano played the soft pattern again, and suddenly, an image formed in the mind. A room, small and filled with warm light. A figure sitting at the same piano, hands moving slowly across the keys. The melody felt the same, almost identical, but the figure's features were blurred. It's impossible to make out. The vision wasn't frightening. It felt like a shared thought. Something passed from one consciousness to another. The person whispered, "Is that you?" The piano responded with a soft, low note, gentle, almost like a nod. A quiet understanding began to take shape. Whatever presence lingered in the piano wasn't trying to scare or confuse anyone. It wasn't trapped in anger or sorrow. It simply wanted to be remembered. Or maybe it wanted its story told. The person leaned forward slightly, allowing their fingers to rest gently on the keys again. "Show me more," they said softly. The air shifted once more, this time warmer and more steady. The piano began to play again, not in scattered notes, but a full, slow melody that was clearer than anything before. And with each rise and fall of the tune, the images returned. The same room appeared again in the person's mind, the same figure sitting at the piano. But the details grew sharper. The room looked older, decorated with simple furniture, warm-colored walls, and sunlight streaming through a window. The figure's hands moved slowly, gracefully, as if playing the piano was the most peaceful part of their life. The person couldn't see the figure's face, not yet, but the atmosphere felt kind, gentle, almost loving as the melody continued. Another image appeared in a different room, darker, filled with worry. A quiet sadness settled over the vision. The figure stood near the piano, their hands trembling slightly. The music in the room had stopped. The piano played a lower note, held just a little too long. The person felt a weight pressed gently into their chest. Not painful, but emotional. It wasn't hard to understand now. Whoever the presence was, they had lived here once. They had played the piano often, perhaps daily. The music had been their comfort. Their story wasn't one of fear or harm. It was a story of someone who had loved music deeply, someone who had left it unfinished. As the images faded, the piano slowly stopped playing. The last note lingered, warm and gentle. The person opened their eyes again, feeling a mix of calm and sadness. The room felt full, not crowded, but full of meaning. The air wasn't empty anymore. It felt like someone else was silently standing nearby, waiting. The person whispered, "You want your story told, don't you?" The piano answered with a soft, bright note filled with unmistakable clarity. Not a sound of fear, not a sound of pain, a sound of yes. The realization washed over the person with a strange sense of responsibility. This wasn't about solving a mystery or escaping fear anymore. It was about understanding, listening, helping a quiet voice from the past find peace. The person stayed there a while longer, letting the room settle. They felt no pressure, no fear, just a gentle encouragement. A feeling that they were doing the right thing. The day outside grew brighter as the sun climbed higher. The room slowly filled with warm light, covering the piano in a soft glow that made it look peaceful, almost serene. The person finally stood from the bench, feeling a clarity inside that they hadn't felt in days. There was more to learn. More the piano wanted to share, more of the story to uncover. But But for now, there was peace, and they knew the journey wasn't over yet. Not until every part of the story found its final note. The morning sunlight slowly filled the house, settling into corners that had once felt heavy with silence. It was the first day in a long time that the house felt truly alive, as if the walls themselves were breathing for the first time in years. The person walked through the hallway with a calmness that hadn't been there before, carrying a sense of purpose that had grown over the last few days. Something inside them knew this day mattered. Something inside whispered that the story was finally ready to be finished. They stepped into the piano room, and a soft warmth greeted them. The instrument stood in its quiet place, almost glowing under the gentle sunlight. There was no fear now, no strange chill in the air. Instead, there was a peaceful stillness, the kind one feels before something meaningful is about to happen. The person walked slowly toward the piano, touching the smooth wood with a steady hand. It felt warm, almost as if someone had been sitting there moments ago. The feeling wasn't frightening, it was comforting, familiar, like a silent welcome. They sat down on the bench, taking a deep breath as they let their fingers rest over the keys. For a moment, the room stayed quiet. Then a soft sound rose from the piano. One note played gently on its own. Almost shy, the person whispered softly, "I'm here. Show me the rest." The air shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to feel like a quiet presence had settled beside them. The piano answered with another note, then another, building a soft pattern that was neither sad nor heavy. It was calm, gentle, like someone preparing to speak through music. Slowly, the melody formed. It wasn't the unfinished tune from before. This one was different, clearer, fuller, carrying the feeling of memories that were finally ready to be shared as the melody filled the room. Another vision formed in the person's mind. This time it wasn't cloudy or broken. It was clear. The same small room as before appeared, warm and filled with soft light. The piano was there, looking newer, polished and beautiful. A person sat at the piano, fingers moving slowly over the keys. This time the face wasn't blurred. It wasn't hidden. The figure looked peaceful, someone gentle, someone who had loved music deeply. Their eyes carried warmth, not sadness. Their hands played the same melody. The piano was sharing now in the present. The person watching the vision felt their hearts swell with a strange mix of warmth and ache. It was like stepping into someone else's treasured memory. The scene shifted. The figure stood next to the piano, writing something in a small notebook. A tune, notes, something important to them. But then the vision dimmed, warm light fading slightly. The figure looked tired, weaker. They touched the piano gently, as if saying goodbye without saying the words. The house around them felt different, not dangerous, but quiet in a final kind of way. The person in the present could feel it, clearly now. The presence in the piano was not a spirit lost in fear or anger. It was simply someone whose last unfinished melody remained echoing inside the house, waiting for someone to hear it, waiting for someone to finish it. The piano played a soft, trembling note, one filled with deep emotion. The person felt tears gather in their eyes, not from fear, but from understanding. They whispered, "You didn't get to finish your song, did you?" The piano responded with a single, gentle, low note, like a quiet yes. The person nodded slowly, feeling the weight of what needed to be done. "Then I'll help you finish it." The room seemed to brighten. The air warmed even more, almost like gratitude. The person rested their hands on the keys, listening closely as the piano played the melody again. They followed each note carefully, slowly filling in the spaces where the music felt incomplete. The piano responded each time, guiding gently, as if teaching from somewhere just beyond sight. Together they shaped the tune, soft, warm, filled with emotion that felt real and deeply human. The more they played, the clearer the presence felt. Not haunting, not trapped, just longing for the final piece of a story that had been waiting in silence. Minutes passed, then more. The melody began to take full form, rising and falling like a gentle wave. The person felt every part of it, the hope, the sadness, the love for music, the quiet farewell. Eventually, the two reached the final section of the melody. The piano paused for a moment, letting the room rest in silence. The person understood. They pressed the final notes softly, letting them flow into one long, warm sound that filled the room with peace. It was simple, but perfect, exactly the ending the melody had been waiting for. The piano answered with one last note, soft and full of meaning. It lingered in the air, warm and gentle, glowing with a sense of completion. Slowly, the vision faded. The warm room, the figure. The unfinished tune all drifted away like a quiet goodbye. The air in the piano room felt different now. Not heavy, not cold. Completely peaceful. The person sat quietly for a long moment, feeling the present slowly fade, not disappearing in pain or sorrow, but gently, like someone finally able to rest after holding on for too long. The piano stayed still, completely still. No more keys moved on their own. No more strange sounds filled the house. The silence was not frightening, it was warm. Like a blanket wrapped around the room, the presence was gone, but not in a sad way. It felt like a story finally finished, a melody finally played to its true end. The person touched the piano one last time. "Thank you," they whispered. A soft breeze drifted through the window, brushing gently across their face, almost like a quiet reply. Days passed, and the house remained peaceful. No strange sounds, no heavy air, only calm. The person sometimes sat at the piano and played the completed melody, letting it fill the room that had once held so much silence. Each time they played, the house felt warm, grateful, almost alive. They wrote the melody down carefully, wanting to preserve it not just as music, but as a memory. As a story passed from someone who could no longer speak, it became more than a tune. It became a part of the house, a part of the person, and a respectful tribute to the one who had once lived there. Even though the presence was gone, the memory of that gentle, unfinished soul lingered in the melody. Not haunting, not sorrowful, just alive through the music that had waited so long to be completed. And whenever the person played it, they felt a soft warmth in the room, like a quiet reminder that some stories never truly fade. They simply find the right heart to finish them. The house, once filled with heavy silence, now carried a peaceful hum. A story that had been hidden for years had finally found its final note, and it ended not with fear, but with music, understanding, and quiet, lasting peace.